Welcome to my presentation on open questions for next generation chatbots. This paper was written by me, Wenson Yi, with help from my advisor, Dr. Chun Li. We're both from the College of William and Mary. We decided to write this paper because next generation chatbots are becoming more and more popular. This is because big names like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google have been developing chatbots that have garnered millions of users. So the most important question becomes, how can we make chatbots that are more engaging? Because unfortunately, the chatbots that have been built so far are lackluster and they're not interesting enough for people to interact with them for long periods of time. So this paper addresses that question. Now, to make human-like chatbots, we have to focus on what the key areas are. And we chose three throughout the course of our research. To understand why we chose these three areas, we can think back to what makes a person human. So when we think about a human being, we think about their ability to use external knowledge. And during conversations, they incorporate external facts into the conversation. And this is what we are going to do when we are building next generation chatbots. We call this knowledge grounding because we're grounding the conversation with some external knowledge. The next key aspect of human beings is a personality. And they express this personality during conversations very clearly. When I talk about a sports team that you really like, you get really excited. And so we want that same characteristic for chatbots. And we call that persona consistency, having a consistent personality. The third main area is emotional intelligence. So when we think of a human being, we clearly see emotions. And these emotions are very clearly expressed during conversation. When you talk about something that upsets them, they get really sad. We want chatbots to do the same thing, to give them some emotional intelligence. And finally, we have to figure out, how do we actually know whether we've reached our goal? Because it's harder than you think to evaluate whether a chatbot is actually human-like. Now we're going to go through each of these key areas one by one, starting with knowledge grounding. And here in the knowledge grounding domain, we ask ourselves, okay, how can we collect the data to train our chatbot to incorporate external facts into the conversation? Well, first we have to choose what kind of knowledge we want the chatbot to have. We have generic knowledge or we have domain-specific knowledge. Okay, let's say we've chosen a type of knowledge. Now, where do we actually go to find this database of facts? Well, you can go to Wikipedia, IMDb, Reddit, and so on and so forth. Now, what are the future research challenges when it comes to actually collecting these external facts? Well, can we learn from both general purpose and domain-specific facts? The tricky part here is that you're mixing two different types of information: general information and specific information. The second question is, can we take advantage of question and answer forms? Websites like Stack Overflow are a rich source of information that show the chatbot exactly how real humans use knowledge in their answers to questions. But the chatbot has to separate the fact usage from general chit-chat, things like hi or bye. The third question is, how can we measure the quality of whatever knowledge base we pull from? Well, the key part here is that we can't just count the number of facts in the knowledge base. That's not going to work all the time. Maybe some facts are more important than others. Now, we're still talking about knowledge grounding, but here we're going to analyze what it's like to actually collect the facts. So there are two data sets used for knowledge grounding. One, a data set of external facts, and two, a data set of conversational exchanges. Now, what are the future research challenges? How can we filter out offensive language from these conversational exchange data sets? The problem here is that you can't just use something like a bad word filter, because hackers can easily just change the spelling a bit and bypass your filter. The second question is, how can we make it easier to collect large amounts of facts in conversations? The tricky part is that there's a lot of pre-processing involved in this fact collection. Maybe you have to organize all the different facts into topics. So, the key difference between this fact collection and the knowledge domain is that the knowledge domain, which is what we talked about in our previous slide, is what database we are pulling our facts from. Fact collection is more concerned with creating the data set that we're using to train our chatbot. Now let's talk about how we can actually build the chatbot such that it can incorporate external facts into the conversation. There are two main approaches, encoder-based and memory networks. What are the future research challenges? Well, first, how can we develop attention mechanisms for facts? If you look to the right, we see a simple machine translation problem, French to English, and attention is nothing more but focusing on particular French words to do the translation. We want to do something similar for facts, meaning focusing on the most important facts for a given response, but facts don't just lie in plain sight, like in machine translation. Next, how can we speed up the training process? Now, the hard part here is that you have to encode all of these facts into something the chatbot can understand, and that takes a long time. Next, how can we leverage transformers? Transformers are big NLP models, so we have to find a way to build them efficiently, train them efficiently, and run them efficiently. Next, we're going to move on to the second area for next generation chatbots, and this is going to be persona consistency. Here, we're talking about what we need to do in order to collect personalities. You can look at data sets like Persona Chat, Wikipedia, or Reddit, and the techniques are to either scrape from social media forums or learn the personalities automatically. On the right, you see that the personality is just a collection of bullet points. I like to drink tea, and so on and so forth. Now, how can we filter out toxic personas? Because we don't want our chatbot to be toxic, but toxic is very subjective. How do we define that? The second question is, can we extract personas from live conversations? This is hard because you're trying to analyze data on the fly and trying to choose which parts of the conversation are most important for someone's expression of personality. Next, let's talk about how we actually define personality, because there are a lot of ways to do it. You can call it a collection of background facts, behavioral traits, or likes or dislikes. On the right, you just see more dimensions of personality. Now, how can we capture all these dimensions of personality? We have to know which one to express at which time. And how do we measure how well the chatbot expresses a personality? We can't just ask someone to say, rate the chatbot in terms of how well it expresses personality, because that's not very objective. And the third question is, how can we teach the chatbot to change its writing style to match its personality? Here you're trying to make a sentence that makes sense, given only a personality description. Next, we're going to talk about how we train the chatbots to effectively express a personality. Three approaches here: memory networks, simple NLPs, and transformers. Now, what features are chatbots learning to exhibit these personalities? Well, that's a research question because we don't really know. That relates back to the explainability of AI. The second question is, how can we use reinforcement learning? Here, the tricky part is coming up with an agent and the optimal policy. The third question is, how can we speed up the training process? Now, here, we have to, again, encode these personalities into entities that the chatbot can understand, and that could take a long time. Next, we're going to talk about the third main area, which is emotional intelligence, and in particular, the dimensions. Now, we have empathy, politeness, or understanding someone else's mood as parts of what makes something emotionally intelligent. And on the right, you just see more dimensions. Now, what are the future research challenges? Well, can we incorporate multiple dimensions into a chatbot? This goes back to trying to choose the right dimension at the right time. And what dimensions are most important for an interesting conversation? This is more of a user study. We ask people, what kinds of emotional intelligence are you looking for in an interesting conversational partner? Next, let's go over what databases you can pull from for emotional information. You can just collect conversational data from emotional situations, or you can do it automatically by training a classifier to detect emotion, then annotate a text corpus with sentiments. Well, how could the chatbot learn emotions from live conversations? This is hard because you're analyzing data on the fly. And like before, you have to choose what parts of the conversation are going to be extracted to train your chatbot. How can we synthesize more complex emotions from a few primary ones? Well, you have to come up with a theory here that tells you how to combine emotions. And how can we leverage multiple emotion data sets from different domains? Different domains means that they might have different kinds of emotions that conflict with each other. Next, we're going to talk about how we build the chatbot to express emotion. We have sequence-to-sequence, transformers, sequence-to-sequence with memory, and sequence-to-sequence with CNNs. These are the main techniques. Now on the right, you just see a multimodal chatbot. It takes in an image and text to respond to the user. It's sequence-to-sequence with CNNs. Now what are the future research challenges? Well, how can we develop an adversarial approach to training the chatbot? Here, we have to figure out what will be the output of the chatbot and how the evaluator will judge the quality of the chatbot's output. Maybe it can do something like trying to figure out whether the chatbot is trying to fake emotion or trying to actually express emotion like a human being. But implementing that is quite difficult. The second question is, how can we develop an attention mechanism for emotions? The hard part here is that we have to store all these emotions somewhere and then just grab them based on their importance during the conversation. The third question is, how can we use an ensemble approach? This is combining multiple neural networks together to get better performance. But we have to figure out a way to combine them such that they actually get better performance. Next, let's go on to the fourth main area, which is human evaluation. There are a couple of experimental guidelines that people use, like Cohen's kappa, setting expectations clearly beforehand, and doing studies with a lot of people. The questions are, how can we develop new metrics for actually seeing if human evaluation is effective? Here you have to look at many studies to make sure. And what are the strengths and pitfalls among all the human evaluation studies? Again, you have to look through and do a literature review of all the studies possible in order to answer this research question. And the third question is, can we integrate human evaluation with automatic? And if so, how? Here we're trying to do two different types of evaluation, so they may conflict with each other. Next, we're going to talk about automatic evaluation. Unfortunately, there's not much correlation between automatic and human evaluation. And if you look to the right, we see that there's an automatic evaluation metric called BLUE2 on the Y and human score on the X. There's almost no correlation that you can see. So, research questions. Can we develop new metrics to evaluate how effective automatic evaluation is? The hard part here is trying to see whether or not automatic evaluation is truly evaluating the quality of the chatbot. And the second question is, can we secure automatic evaluation against attacks? Because people could be very tricky and start giving information to the chatbot that may make it seem like it's doing very well, but in fact it's being hacked. And next, we're going to talk about how we design new metrics. So here, we can either combine human and automatic evaluation, or we can train an evaluator. What are the research challenges? Well, first, how can we use reinforcement learning? Again, we have to define a policy and also an agent. And the second question is, how can we design metrics that combine multiple dimensions of response quality? So do we just want the response to be very long, very interesting, very informative? What do we do? All right, well, that is the end for this presentation. I hope this gives you a good idea of what next generation chatbots should look like. If you have any questions, please ask. Thank you.